She didn't look like a smuggler. That was the first thing Ren told me, and I knew Ren well enough to understand that was his way of saying she looked exactly like one, the kind of ordinary that criminal networks paid for. Lone traveler, no pack mark, a worn leather satchel and a composure so precise it could have been rehearsed. I told him to bring her to the East Watchtower, not the cells. The East Watchtower had a table, a fire, and a window that looked out over the Pine-Dark Valley where my kingdom fell away toward the pass. I told myself I chose it because the light was better for reading a face. My wolf didn't offer an explanation. He simply stood up straighter inside my chest, the way he did before a fight, except this was not the posture of a fight. I had no word for what it was. I filed it as I filed everything, and I went to meet her. She was standing at the window when I arrived, looking down at the valley. She hadn't sat. She hadn't paced. The frost on the glass had been breathed away from one small pane, and she was looking through that clearing as if she had been waiting, patiently, for the view to tell her something useful. She turned when I came in. She didn't startle. "I know how this looks," she said, before I could speak. "I'd rather not perform innocence for you if it's all the same. I'll simply tell you what happened and you can weigh it." I stood in the doorway for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I pulled out the chair across the table from her, sat down and said, "Tell me what happened." Her name was Sable. She was a healer, itinerant, unaffiliated, the kind who moved from border town to border town, filling the gap between the pack healers who wouldn't cross lines and the villages that had no one. She had been in this stretch of the north for 2 months. She named the villages. I recognized every one of them. 3 days before my men found her on the Vayreth Pass Road, she had stopped at the coaching inn in Furlach, a settlement that sat exactly on the territorial seam between my pack lands and the disputed territory to the east. A man had approached her there. He knew she was a healer, he said. He had a commission from a border village, medicinal dried herbs packed in a sealed tin, too fragile to go by the regular freight, and he needed a careful carrier. He would pay the standard courier rate. She had accepted. The tin was in her satchel. It was not herbs. I had already had it opened before she arrived. It was a pack seal. Specifically, the secondary authentication seal of the Aldrin family's eastern branch, which had been reported stolen 6 weeks ago in a breach that had nearly started a war. She didn't know. I was almost certain she didn't know, and I was almost certain of very few things in my life. "You didn't open it," I said. "He told me not to. Fragile," he said. She paused. "I understand that sounds convenient. It sounds like someone who chose a careful carrier, because careful carriers don't investigate the package." She looked at me steadily. She had gray eyes, not the silver of wolfkin, but the flat, clear gray of Winter River water, the kind of gray that sees without flinching. "Yes," she said, "that's what I think too." I told Ren to give her the room above the East Watchtower guard post. Clean, warm, with a bolt she could use from the inside. I told him she was not to be treated as a prisoner. He gave me a look I chose not to acknowledge, and he went. I spent the first night with my trackers going over the route she had described. The coaching inn at Furlach was a known waypoint, not for criminals specifically but for movement. Everyone passed through Furlach. That was the point of it. Whoever had handed her that tin had been careful, a lone healer with no pack allegiance, traveling a credible route, carrying what looked like medical supplies. She was a perfect vessel precisely because she was clean. My wolf spent the first night doing something I could not name, not restless, almost the opposite, oriented, the way a compass finds north and goes still. I filed it. On the second day I brought her a map and asked her to walk me through every stop she had made in the past 2 months. She was thorough. She did not embellish and she did not minimize. She gave me the shape of her 2 months in the north with the same directness she gave me everything. And I found myself watching the way she traced routes with her finger, pausing to correct herself when she wasn't certain rather than guessing to seem more useful. Most people, in her position, tried to seem more useful. She seemed to have decided that accurate was more valuable than impressive. She was right, it was. By the end of the second day, I had 3 new lines on my map that hadn't been there before. The stolen seal had moved before it reached her. I could see the shape of it now, the handoffs, the cover layers. She had been the last and cleanest layer. Before her there had been at least 2 others, and those others had left traces she had not, because they had known what they were carrying and therefore been afraid, and fear makes marks. I sent 8 men east that night. I didn't tell her. I owed her nothing yet, not officially. She was still technically detained. My wolf felt the omission like a splinter. On the 3rd evening I spread the full map on the table in the War Council room, the broad stone chamber on the 2nd level of the watchtower, where my senior trackers and my council head, Bren, were gathered around the table's edge. I had asked Sable to come. I needed her to confirm the exact location of the Furlatch Inn, the specific corner of the common room, the direction the man had come from. Details that might seem small and were not. She came. She stood on the other side of the table from me and looked at the map with the focused attention she gave everything, and I leaned across the wide table to indicate the Eastern Pass Road, to show her the route as I understood it, to ask her to show me where I had it wrong. My hand was perhaps 18 inches from hers when the mark came. I had heard of it. Every alpha knows the theory of the mate mark, the twin flare that rises on both wrists when fated mates are in close proximity, when the bond has been building long enough beneath the surface. I had read the accounts the way I read everything, carefully, skeptically, with the understanding that most of the accounts were old and romanticized and should not be trusted entirely. It was nothing like the accounts. It was not romantic. It was not even particularly gentle. It was the sensation of something that had been under pressure for a very long time, making its presence undeniable, like a door that had been holding shut against a current suddenly giving way. Not a flood, a pressure released, a thing settling into its actual shape. On my left wrist, beneath the cuff of my sleeve, the mate mark surfaced, the old wolf sign, the paired crescent mark that my grandmother had described to me once as something she saw only twice in her life. It warmed against my skin from the inside out, the way banked coals warm when you open the damper. Sable made a sound, not quite a sound, more the shape of a sound, a breath cut short. She was looking at her right wrist. I straightened slowly. The room was very quiet. Bren across the table had seen, my trackers had seen, no one spoke. I looked at her. She was looking at her own wrist, and her expression was not what I expected. It was not awe. It was not the calculated performance of a woman who understood what leverage she had just acquired. It was something more private than either of those things. A woman encountering something she had no prior framework for, turning it over carefully before she would decide what to think about it. She looked up at me. "I don't know what this is," she said clearly to the room and to me equally. "I want you to know that I'm not using it, whatever it means. I'm not using it." The room was still quiet. My wolf was not quiet at all. I said, "I know." I did know. That was the part that undid me, not the mark, or not only the mark. It was that I had been watching her for 3 days weigh accuracy against impression and choose accuracy every time, and I knew the shape of that habit well enough to recognize it when I saw it turned on herself. We finished the map. She showed me the corner of the common room, the direction the man had come from, the precise table. My men had already confirmed the inn's layout matched her memory. They confirmed it again, against the detail she added now, and it still matched. I told Bren, "We'll have the full network within a fortnight." He nodded. He did not look at the mark on my wrist. He was a careful man. That night I went to the East Watchtower and knocked on the door below her room. She opened it. She was still dressed, still working by the look of it, a small journal open on the table behind her. "The men I sent east found the second handoff point," I said, "and a name. It won't be long now." She leaned against the doorframe. The firelight from inside edged her face. "Will you tell me when it's over?" she said. "I'll tell you myself." She nodded. She did not ask about the mark. Neither did I then. There was a right time for a thing like that, and this was not yet it. She seemed to understand the same thing. I went back to my own rooms and sat by the window for an hour looking at the pine-dark valley and thinking about a woman who refused to use what she could have used, and what kind of person that made her, and what kind of king it made me that I had not thought to ask what I could give her instead of what I could determine about her. My wolf, for the first time in 12 years of border governance, felt something that was not vigilance. It took 11 days. The network was larger than I had anticipated and more careful. The Aldrin Seal had been taken to be used as leverage in a land transfer dispute that would have given the Eastern Territorial faction a legal foothold inside my border. It was sophisticated, not violent, but more dangerous than violence in the long run. The kind of scheme that unravels government slowly, from inside the seams. We rolled it up quietly. The man from the Furlatch Inn was taken, and with him the 3 others in the chain above him. The evidence was thorough. It would hold. On the 12th day, I called the full council. It was not a large assembly. My senior trackers, Bren, the 4 pack elders, and the 2 border representatives who had standing to witness formal clearances. I had Sable brought to the council chamber, the proper one this time, on the upper level, where the old stone table ran the full length of the room, and the windows looked out over the whole of the Veyrath Valley. I stood at the head of the table, and I presented the case in full. The stolen seal, the chain of custody, the network structure and intent, and the role that had been forced on an unaffiliated traveling healer who had done nothing more culpable than accept a credible commission at a roadside inn. "The evidence is complete," I said at the end. She carried the seal unknowingly. She disclosed everything she knew without being asked twice, and her route gave us the thread that unraveled the network. I looked at the council. "The clearance is formal and full." Bren said, "So noted," and wrote it into the record. I looked at Sable across the table. She was sitting straight-backed, her hands folded on the table in front of her, and she received the clearance the same way she received everything, without performance. "You're free to go," I said. "Your satchel is in the East Room. Whatever expenses you incurred in the past 12 days, the pack will cover." The council members filed out, or most of them did. Bren stayed, because Bren always stayed until he was confident the room had arrived at whatever it was actually for. He poured himself something from the sideboard and pretended to review papers. Sable stood. She gathered her jacket from the back of the chair. She said, "Thank you for believing me before you had to." That was the piece of it I had been holding for 12 days without a word for it. She had named it exactly. I said, "I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to know that the clearance stands either way. It has nothing to do with your answer." She waited. "I'd like you to stay, not as a healer under pack contract, not as anything official, just to stay, long enough for us to understand what the mark means without either of us having to figure it out under the pressure of an investigation." I paused. The words were not the words of a king. I was aware of that. I'm asking, not offering a position, not invoking the bond, asking. She looked at me for a long moment. She turned the question over, I could see it, with the same careful attention she gave routes on a map. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." Bren at the sideboard turned a page. She stayed. The winter deepened, and she moved through Veyrath the way water moves through a landscape, not changing it dramatically, only finding the places where it was needed. She worked in the valley villages because there was work there and because she was who she was. My wolf tracked her, even when she was miles away, with the quiet certainty of a compass in a drawer. It didn't need to be checked. It always knew. We talked, in the evenings, the way 2 people talk when they've both been cautious most of their lives, and have arrived at a place where caution is no longer the most useful tool. She told me about the 2-month roads, about the villages too small to be on my official maps, about the kind of medicine that didn't require equipment but required patience, and she had both. I told her about 12 years of border governance, about the weight of a judgment made before the evidence was quite complete, about the one time I had been wrong and what that cost, and how I had not allowed myself another near miss since. She listened with the same attention she gave maps. Then she said, "The problem with never acting before the evidence is complete is that evidence takes time, and sometimes the thing you needed to act on doesn't wait." I said, "I know." She said, "Your wolf knew." She said it not as a correction, as something she had thought over and decided was fair to say. I said, "My wolf was well ahead of me." She smiled. It was a small, private smile, not performed for anyone, the kind that happens when something is recognized rather than found. By the time the first thaw loosened the pass roads in early spring, we had learned the shape of each other, not the ceremonial shape, but the actual one, the one that emerges in the small hours of an investigation, in the silence after a disagreement resolved, in the habit of saying the true thing rather than the useful one. The mate mark on my wrist had long since settled from the heat of the watchtower table to something quieter, a warmth that was specific to her location, that I had stopped needing to look at because I simply knew. The formal acknowledgement happened in the way things happen in Veyrath, practically. No ceremony built for an audience. I took her hand in front of my counsel in the ordinary course of a morning's business, and I said, "This is Sable of the Pack Roads, and she stays." The counsel acknowledged it. Bren wrote it down. She looked at the table and then at me, and her expression was the one she had outside the East Tower window on the first night, not arranged, not certain, but genuinely, carefully present. The East Valleys remember her differently than the Great Hall will. The villages on the pass road, the ones too small for my official maps, know her name. A healer came through once, they say, who happened to unravel a network that would have taken our border, happened by walking a credible route with a careful reputation, and never once performing innocence. I know what really happened. I had 12 days to weigh the evidence, and 11 of them I spent knowing the answer already, because my wolf had arrived at the truth in the first 30 seconds of her standing at that window with a cleared pane of frost. She never asks me which I trusted first, the evidence or the wolf. I think she already knows. I think she decided at some point in those 12 days that a man who could hold the two things together, the need for proof and the fact of knowing, was the kind of man whose asking was worth answering. She was right, she usually is. The pass roads are her territory now as much as mine, and Veyrath knows it. The wolves that guard the eastern border have a habit I didn't teach them. When they see her satchel on the road, they fall into step beside her, not as guards. As wolves that have decided the road she's on is the right one. I understand the impulse. I felt it first. I just needed 12 more days than they did.